Hello, my name is Padma Chosdun. I am an Avanti Fellow. I am 16 years old and I am currently studying in JNV Chandigarh. I love studying biology and I want to become a neurosurgeon. Welcome to Avanti, a show where incredible women who are at the top of their fields share the obstacles they had to overcome to get there. Here's our host Vandana Goyal.
Daughter to a professor of mechanical engineering in Jamshedpur, India, Shar Dubey's early years were spent on a college campus. Here is where she learned the value of a good education and eventually led her to become the only female student in her course at IIT Kharagpur. From starting her professional life in a steel company in India to making the bold move to the United States with only $800, Shar's journey is a testament to her dedication and grit. After graduating from Ohio State University, one of her first roles was an aerospace engineer at Texas Instruments, where she became the company's first female Indian engineer. In this episode, I talked to Shar about the pivotal career moments that shaped her life, including her groundbreaking work at Match Group, where she served as Chief Executive Officer during the pandemic. We discuss her innovative contributions at Tinder, what her superpower is and how she wields it, as well as her passion for girls in STEM. Hello, Shar. Welcome to our podcast. So happy to have you.
Likewise, it's wonderful.
We are going to start from the very beginning and explore who you were as a young girl growing up in India. You grew up in a city called Jamshedpur. Your father was a professor of mechanical engineering. And as the daughter of a professor, was it always a sure thing that you were also going to pursue engineering?
Actually, I did not want to be an engineer. I wanted to be an architect. In fact, I even went to study architecture in Roorkee, but I got really sick, and my parents came and brought me back home. They said, you can't be that far away from home. So hence IIT Kharagpur, but IIT Kharagpur also has a architecture program, and that's what I was supposed to go enroll in. However, when I went to register, I got a lot of counsel, I suppose, that architecture is a difficult field. It's a 5-year thing, so you should pursue engineering. And that's how I happened to become an engineer, really.
So engineering was the cure for your sickness?
That's right. That's right. If I hadn't gotten sick, I would have been an architect.
And you lived on campus while your father was a professor. So what was that like? How did that influence you?
It was in some ways very idyllic and utopian in a way, because I lived on the engineering school campus. All my friends' parents were professors. It was obviously a very educated crowd, but also a strong sense of community. I definitely realized much later in life that the rest of the world and the country is not quite the childhood upbringing I had, which was absolutely fabulous.
I met someone last week who grew up on the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research campus. And she told me that when they were growing up, all of the kids went to IIT. So was that what it was like for you? Was there always the pressure or expectation to achieve at that level?
You know, my parents were very ambitious for me. My dad had this strong belief that if I could just stand on my own 2 feet and be financially independent, everything else would automatically get resolved. I'm not sure where he got that from. It wasn't true for much of my extended family, or even the campus for that matter. I might have still be the only girl that went to IIT from that campus. There were maybe 1 or 2 other boys that made it to IIT. My parents were very ambitious for me. My dad and my mom both believed that education was my ticket to upward mobility. My dad was very keen on me going to NIIT, I remember. But I don't know that I grew up with that kind of ambition. Do they tell me that girls don't make it to IIT? Oh, well, I'm going to prove them wrong. So that might have been a bigger driver for me, quite honestly, than actually going to NIIT.
I wanted to speak a little bit about your time at IIT Kharagpur. You've shared a story about being the only woman in your batch. Were you the only woman?
In my department
In your
the
department.
last 2 years, yeah.
And your lab partner refused to sit with you? And other students would move away from you? I'm just trying to imagine that. Is that what happened?
So, as you can imagine, in the late 80s, when I went to IIT, there were very, very few girls, like really few girls. And so I happened to be in a class of about, I want to say about 80 to 100 boys, and I was the only girl in that class. And as strange as it was for me, I think it was pretty strange for the boys too in that class. The social upbringing of most of us in the 80s was not a very normal gender interaction. And so, yes, it's true. I went to class the first day. I was a little bit late. And so the first couple of rows were all people were already in their seats. So I went into the third row and I sat in the middle of the third row. And then everyone else that came after me, they skipped the third row and went and sat behind me. And literally, like, 20 people could have sat in my row and nobody wanted to sit next to me. And a lot of this went on. My lab partner was too embarrassed to come to his labs with me. Nobody would talk to me. It was almost like I was this completely alien being. And I said to myself, I can't survive 4 years of this. This is not going to work. And so that's when, within the first week, I almost thought of quitting. And one of the girls who was a couple of years senior to me, she sat me down and she said, if you quit, who's going to lose? It's going to be you. So suck it up and go take charge of the situation. And I did. I figured it was going to be on me to try to figure out what kind of relationship I'm going to have with these boys and these classmates who clearly are very uncomfortable talking to me. And so I sort of went and forced my lab partner to come to his labs, and I would make a lot of the first moves. But at the end of it, I became really good friends with a lot of my classmates by the time I graduated.
Did their attitude towards women change over those 4 years? Did you see any difference?
Their attitude towards me certainly changed. We truly became friends and classmates in every sense of the world. You have to keep in mind, this was a very isolated campus with not very many women generally entering the campus. So my vantage point is very limited. But I do think a lot of them became more confident and comfortable talking to women.
So after you graduated from IIT, you saved some money, you took a plane to Ohio, where you would get your MS in engineering from Ohio State. Why did you make that decision? Is that correct? Ohio State?
Actually, I went back. I wanted to stay in India and work in India. I was a little idealistic at the time, and I did not want to be part of the group that applies before you're in your senior year and knows that you're going abroad. And so I went back to my hometown and I got a job at Tata Steel or Tisco. And I lasted about a year. But within a few months they told me, and again, this was every year, they used to hire about 100 graduate trainees. And we were 3 girls and 97 boys in that batch. And very early, they told me the only career I could have was in the R&D, or the research and development division. And that's what prompted me to start thinking about what other options could there be for me, because that's not how I envisioned the rest of my life happening. I figured there's got to be more. But that's what prompted me to apply, to take my GRE and apply for a master's.
So you were an idealist. You wanted to stay in India, literally got chased away to pursue a dream. What was it like moving to the US initially, and then after you finished your master's, you stayed. Your first job was at Texas Instruments, but why did you stay?
Yeah, I'd never been on a plane before. I had no idea.
Wow.
Everything I knew about America was through books. And I had no family in the States. There happened to be one senior of mine that I knew was at Ohio State. And so I wrote to him that I'm thinking of coming. I don't know, I don't have a place to stay. Will you be able to arrange something for me for a couple of nights before I go figure it out? And I never got a response from him because there was no email during this time. You had to use the international snail mail, as you can imagine. And I took my first plane ride ever in my life and ended up first JFK and then Columbus, Ohio, and got there late in the evening. I can't believe what my parents were thinking, letting a 22-year-old get on a
And you
plane,
didn't
not
know
knowing,
anyone.
didn't know anyone. So I got there. Fortunately, he showed up at the airport and he was kind enough to organize room to stay with two other girls on campus. And that was the beginning of my journey here. I was, I think, completely dazzled by what America stood for and the opportunities it would provide someone like me, a woman. But I don't think I realized it until I came here that I really felt like this felt right for some place where I didn't have to conform to a lot of traditional expectations of a woman my age. And that's why I decided to extend my stay. And it's,
Until
I
now.
think, very quick. I also happened to meet my now husband of 27 some odd years. I had met him actually in Tisco. He was there for a couple of months. And then we reconnected when I got to the States. And then, you sort of build your village and your family, and this becomes home.
Absolutely. You were the first woman to be hired at Texas Instruments as well?
Actually, not TI. My first job was an aerospace engine manufacturing company in rural Pennsylvania. And I was the first woman engineer they hired and also the first foreigner that they hired. The H-1B visa processing. I was the very first one that they did. I show up to the shop floor. All of these people who worked there were veterans who'd been there for 20, 30 years. The supervisor, a guy named Benny, who really called the shots on the shop floor, he looks me up and down and I'm like, really? You have a funny name, you sound weird, and you are going to tell us how to do our jobs better? I mean, that was literally his first conversation with me. And it was, I think, a real test of everything that ended up shaping me and who I became later in life. I realized I had to make myself accessible. I had to gain their trust. I had to earn credibility. And that also meant learning to speak a little differently. And I did shorten my name so that it wasn't so strange for them to say. I worked harder than all of them. I came in first, left last. Actually, the big test for me was Benny got diagnosed with prostate cancer at one point. And I think I had earned enough of his trust that he felt okay handing over the keys to me versus any of his lieutenants.
Wow.
And reluctantly, he gave me the keys and he went, got his surgery. When he came back, I hadn't burned things down. I hadn't destroyed anything. And I think that was the turning point of our relationship, to a point where when I left, Benny cried. And it was the biggest accomplishment I've ever had in my professional career.
So you went on, after your time at TI, you went on to join the Match Group in 2006, or there was some stuff in between.
Yeah, there was actually. So I was still doing traditional engineering, both at Reading Alloys, then semiconductor in Texas Instruments. And right around that time, as you can imagine, mid 90s, the software was becoming a thing, and the internet was just about starting. And so it's one of those things where it's important for people to understand that it's not just the training that you have, but how the world is changing around you. And if you really want to be a part of that movement, how do you sniff opportunities and make fairly substantial pivots? And it was a big pivot for me to go from traditional engineering to software. And I joined a supply chain company called i2 Technologies that was doing some groundbreaking work in enterprise software at the time. And keep in mind, I didn't have any kind of computer science or software background at the time. So I self-taught myself and learned the rest of it on the job. But the 8 years at i2 did three things for me. One, it allowed me to switch to a technology field that was going to become very, very important in the next decade and two. The second, it gave me my first exposure to business. So I was doing more client-facing jobs, and I got a sense of what it was that software did to solve real-world business problems. And I found myself far more interested in the business problems than actually the technology part of it. Technology almost became an enabler to it. And third, I met one of my closest friends now and my future business partner, Mandy Ginsburg at i2 as well. And then she was on the marketing side of the organization. I was on the product engineering, product development side of the organization. We became friends, not close friends, but friends at the time. And she left and came to this tiny little company that was starting out during the dot-com bubble, if you will, called Match.com. And it was a sub 200 million in revenue business based out of Dallas. And she was hired as a GM to try and take to market a second brand for this company. A couple of months into her job, she called me and she said, I can figure this marketing stuff out, but I have no idea what I'm doing on product engineering, data science, and analytics. And do you know someone who can help me out? And I called her back a few days later. And I said, you know what? I don't know anything about consumer internet. I don't know online dating, but how hard can it be? I'll do it.
Okay.
We'll figure it out. But that became the beginning of a wonderful friendship and partnership and a journey that I can only look back and marvel at. Because when we started, less than 3% of marriages in the US started online. By the time I left, nearly 50% of marriages start online.
How many years was that? Over what time period?
It was 15, 16 years,
Wow.
so a decade and a half. And we were part of this journey that transformed society in a profound way.
So you did a lot of innovative things in your time at Match. Some of them, honestly speaking, I've never heard of. Things like the Daily Five, the Likes You and Videos feature on Tinder. So can you share a little bit about what was the trigger for that those innovations? How did you come up with them? And what did it take to actually, bring those to market?
The names you mentioned are kind of a little bit in the weed. I think what's maybe helpful to think about what happened even in the 15 years that I was heading various aspects of this business. I've always been a builder, like a product engineering person, and I don't think changed even when I was running the public company. I was still most interested in the product and engineering side of things. But It's a super fast changing technology. We had the internet, then, we had e-commerce, and then the mobile smartphone came and everything shifted. And so a lot of this massive video became really mainstream. There's a lot of technology, particularly in the consumer space, changed during that 15 years. So in some ways, if you don't innovate to keep up or even stay ahead of this, somebody will come disrupt you. And so we always did within Match Group. And Match Group, keep in mind, even though it started as Match.com, by the time I left, we owned Tinder, we owned Hinge, we owned OkCupid, we owned about 48 different global brands around the world. And many of them were acquisitions, but many of them were incubations. Tinder came out of a hackathon that we had internally, and it became sort of this completely disruptive dating app. So innovation had to be a survival thing in fast-paced changing technology field. In terms of what does it take, how do you get innovation, there's a couple of, I think, principles to think about. To me, innovation is creative problem solving, right? It's like out of the box problem solving. There is clearly a problem that you're trying to solve, and you do it in a way that nobody else is solving for. And that somehow becomes much more disruptive.
I'm just thinking, because you were a product of this very traditional Indian schooling system, right? You grew up in that system, you went to IIT, you moved to the US. It is not intuitive that you were never taught that ability. You mentioned a little bit earlier about having, self-taught around software, around using technology, around product. Where did these skills develop?
I think schooling gave me some skills, but the biggest thing I think it gave me was confidence. The ability to believe that I can figure this out. I can do this. And I don't think I quite understood that until much later in life. IIT, the same way. The fact that I was the only girl in my class and managed to turn that into a fairly advantageous learning opportunity for me, again, gave me enormous confidence that I can figure this out. And as you have some of these things happen to you, your confidence keeps growing and you're able to take bigger risks. The other thing I will say, IIT, nothing about what I learned in IIT I ever applied in real life, honestly, other than problem solving. The ability to break down a problem into smaller parts and then figure out how best to solve bits of it so that it is much more realistic and in some ways doesn't seem overwhelming, I think is a very important skill that we learned. I think an advantage I had based on the Indian system of learning was mental math, which came very handy for me here in the US. And so if you're in a meeting and you're looking at a P&L or a profit and loss sheet or, any kind of financial model, there's just a training muscle that we had built, which allowed me to see certain things and do calculations on the fly and seem really smart in meetings.
You had, I think, in earlier interviews, talked about your memory being your superpower. When did you realize that you had this kind of incredible memory, and how is it a superpower?
I think I knew I had a good memory because I would memorize Shakespeare, like end to end, cover to cover, and without sort of wanting to really or intending to. It's just couple of times I would read it and I would remember them. I don't think it was particularly useful until much later in life. And I would say it was sometime in my Match career that I realized the power of this ability to retain random facts. I would have a real advantage in any kind of discussion of being able to both challenge and come to different kinds of conclusions because of all these random facts that I would remember that nobody else would remember. And then suddenly I got this reputation that, oh, if you're having a meeting with Shar, be careful, go do your homework because she remembers everything. And then I realized, okay, this is a real advantage for me, and this is something I should make sure I don't lose, and it becomes my superpower. And so a long time ago, I decided I was never going to take notes. Taking notes does handicap you because it doesn't make you seem like you're completely engaged in a conversation if you're busy writing notes. But also, it was a huge test for me to try and see how many things I remembered from that meeting and how many balls I dropped. And this became sort of a test and exercise that I continue to do to this day.
So I just wanted to switch gears a little bit. You and I have talked a lot in the context of our work at Avanti Fellows about what stops girls from being able to succeed. One of them is certainly some of the more advanced subject matter that they have to cope with in preparing for competitive exams that help them go to IIT, things like physics and advanced math, and then perhaps some of this feeling of isolation that you faced when you were at IIT. How do you think about that today? How do girls actually overcome some of those barriers?
There's a number of things that play into why women are a little bit intimidated by subjects like math and physics. A big chunk of it is just expectations and the social programming of, girls are not good at math. How many times have we heard that? And that is one that absolutely we should be able to overcome. And it is on us collectively to sort of break that stereotype, which is completely flawed, that there is any sort of genetic reason why woman is just going to be bad at math. That just cannot be true and is not true. There's no research that shows that that is true. The other part of it is our own confidence because of some of this stuff that we have seen, added to the fact that we do not actually see a lot of role models that have broken that stereotype. Do we believe that this is something I can undertake? My hope, Vandana, is it is changing slowly, but surely it is changing. And I've come to believe that even if the change is slow, it will sustain because it's breaking those two fundamental barriers. One is the social expectation, the expectation of the teachers, the expectation of your parents, the expectation of your peers about what women are capable of, and also the ability to see more and more women sort of break it. Ultimately, it is the belief that you can do it. I cannot tell you how important it is for us, and not just for women, for everyone. The day you think, I can't do this, you've already failed. You have to be able to believe you can do this.
It's interesting because in India, the issue isn't that women are not pursuing science and math in higher education. In fact, more women in India as a percentage, about 43%, are in STEM-related courses in higher education. The issue in India is that they don't work after they graduate. Either they don't join the workforce at all, or they drop out, likely after marriage, or more likely after they have kids. So can you speak a little bit to some of the things that you did when you were in the position to influence policy at your company to create an environment that worked for working mothers?
I've thought a lot about why it is that women disproportionately drop out of the workforce. My strong view on this is there's a role that women have to play, which is not something they can hand over to anyone, being a mother and, having kids and taking care of the family. And then we've got this additional role that we're wanting to play, which is the workplace. If the workplace is not friendly or accommodative of this additional role that women have to play, then it does become a hostile environment for a lot of women. And that is likely the biggest reason why women drop out of the workforce. And if you think about why that is, clearly, the family unit and the traditional gender roles have been well defined for a long time. And all of these institutions where women are now trying to break into were originally designed for men and for what their lifestyle was and what they wanted and the roles they had to play. And you bring in women, and there were really hard constraints. Think about how recent even maternity leave in most countries is, right? The acknowledgement that a woman will have a baby at some point, and that's good for society, and that should not be a reason why she should be not participate in the workforce. That hard constraint, by all means, has been broken fairly recently. And again, not super friendly in many parts of the world. And there's many such sort of constraints, right? This ability to understand that a woman needs a little more flexibility in her work hours to be able to play this dual role. And it ought to be okay for them to be able to take these chunks of time as long as the work gets done. And so this 9 to 5 construct is also a pretty hard barrier for a lot of women. And most workplaces are not designed to be able to take that into account. Then outside of a number of these hard constraints, there are a lot of soft constraints. I mean, I'll tell you this story, which after all these years broke my heart a little bit. I was going to go speak to a number of new employees at one of the businesses that we had. And so I told them to collect a bunch of topics that they would like me to address. So the number one topic that came out of the men: how do I succeed? How do I grow? How soon can I become a manager? Very much oriented to success in career. The number one question that came out of the women was, how do I make myself heard in a meeting without seeming aggressive? Which just goes to show, this sort of expectation of how a woman ought to behave. And if she tries to play the same sort of standards and roles that men are in a men's field, that doesn't go well. So we have to almost create our own terminology and style and make it acceptable in some ways.
One of the things that I try to model for our team at Avanti is that from, at a certain point in the evening, I switch off, right? And that's my time with my kids. And I'm there with them until they go to sleep. And then if I need to come back, I come back. And I try to be pretty disciplined about that. That's my way, not just of giving my kids the time that they deserve with their parents, but also a way of modeling to our entire team, not just women, but to the men, that you have to draw those firm lines. So what did you do as a leader?
So when Mehdi and I were in our early days at Match, we were probably the only senior leadership women in the parent company, which was IAC at the time. And we were fairly young moms. Both of us had little kids at the time. And one of the things that I don't know that we were very intentional about it. It may have been very organic, and we may have gotten some extra confidence because it was two of us versus just one of us trying to model certain behaviors. But we were very open and transparent, and we would talk freely about a working woman, and what they needed to face. So for instance, we were in a meeting. If we got a call from school, your kid is sick, that is not something, we wouldn't make excuses for getting out of the meeting. We would be very intentional. It's like, oh, they called from the school again and she's sick and I can't and I have to go now. I'm so sorry, but we will come back and do this. And the more we talked about all of these fairly natural things that we all deal with, we realized, and this is not something we realized at the moment, but a lot of women told us later, is they felt more comfortable bringing their full selves to work and feeling comfortable asking for time off or a leave or flexible hours, or if they had a crisis at home, the ability to turn off, and a lot of these different things that, we just were trying to put on a different sort of personality in some ways when we brought ourselves to work. We made them comfortable to be their self. And then we realized over time we were attracting more women to the organization. We were able to close more women in interviews, and we were able to retain women to a point where when I left, nearly 40% of VP and above in our organization were women. And I don't think we didn't set goals, we didn't do anything very dramatic. It was very much modeling an environment and building a culture where it was friendly to women. One of the things we realized much later is we were one of the first tech companies that did a pay equity audit. And this is something Mandy and I talked a lot. It's like women don't know how to advocate for themselves. They don't know how to negotiate, salary, compensation. It's a thing we were not very good at. And we realized that even us, we were handing out promotions and pay increases to people who were the squeakiest, because it's just very human that somebody who's in your ear all the time is someone you don't want to deal with, and you sort of do it. And somebody who's doing their work in the corner, you get ignored. Now there's a balance of how you actually advocate for yourselves, but this is what drove us to say, are we really paying our people well? And so we were one of the very first companies that did a pay equity audit before it became a function that, is part of ESG in a lot of companies now. So these are some of the little ways I would say we tried to make the company a friendlier place for women.
One of the things that drives me crazy personally is when we talk about this issue as just an issue of representation. And I think this is why we don't actually see progress, because that doesn't make sense to anybody, right? Like when it's just a thing of numbers and percentages. I think what we have to talk about is how it enriches the quality of what you do, the outcome, the product, your revenue, right? The decisions that you make, the types of products that get designed. Can you speak to that, how that representation of women at the senior levels can actually shift those things? Does it?
For us, it was stupid if you had an all boys team develop a dating app. Dating app. Can you understand what that would look like? And there'd be no women. And, for us, it was just, and I have been in some very absurd product development discussions in my career. And I would argue that that's largely the case for a lot of areas that we live in. Like, imagine marketing a product where 50% of your audience is women and you have no women in the team to actually tell you what would resonate with women, So to me, it's always been a very obvious thing. The reason I've been advocating so strongly for women to be in technology and to be in leadership positions, particularly in technology, is think about how our lives have changed in the last 2 decades, and particularly last decade. Every part of our life, from healthcare to education to everything, is influenced by technology. And if women are not part of it, of shaping it, of driving it, of determining what it should look like, then they become consumers of a piece of technology that's going to influence their lives, very much similar to all of the institutions we are trying to change today, because they were originally created by men. And that's my fundamental sort of issue with it's not about representation. It's just being practical. If you're going to be a consumer of this, you should have a seat at the table to drive what it looks like. And that's why I'm a big, big advocate of women in leadership and in tech.
That's a beautiful way to wrap up. Thank you so much, Shar, for being with us. I have always admired you, but I've learned so much about you in this past hour. So thank you for sharing so many stories with us. Shar, we have a question from one of our students for you. Anvita is a grade 11 student from a school in rural Karnataka in the south of India. Her father works in agriculture and her mother is a clerk. Her aim is to pursue a career in botany. And she wants to know, why did you choose a dating app startup over any other kind of startup?
It was a lot of just being at the right place at the right time. I don't think I was seeking it out necessarily. But once I got in, I thought this was the perfect thing for me at the time because it allowed me to combine sociology, psychology, anthropology with technology, and then have a pretty profound impact on people's lives. So I've enjoyed every bit of it, but I really only stumbled into it.
Wonderful. And what do you think about her future in botany? Any advice for her?
I do think we understand so little of the nature around us, and it is going to be an existential crisis for us coming down. So hopefully she's able to figure out all kinds of deep problems the world needs to solve in the next few decades.
I'm hoping the intersection of botany and technology,
Yes, exactly.
we can influence her to
Absolutely.
pursue. She's going to be so happy to hear you answer her question. So thank you. Thanks so much to Shar for being on the show. If you enjoyed that episode, do tune in every week as we sit down with more remarkable women. The podcast is hosted by Avanti Fellows, a nonprofit that breaks the cycle of poverty in India by providing access to post-secondary education for students from underserved communities. With this show, we aim to inspire thousands of young people with these real-life stories of incredible female leaders who have made a lasting impact on their industries. To learn more about the work we do, visit www.avantifellows.org.